Joining me now is candidate Peter Kobak, who is running for one of those 5 open seats. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
First, I kind of want to start off in the sense of just yesterday or this morning, a report came out, Governing Magazine, that shows that Peoria area schools are the most segregated amongst whites and blacks in metropolitan areas in the country. Also, 6th most segregated amongst residential. I say that because we know that residential areas have a big impact on where your kids go to school. So I've been asking a lot of the city council candidates. We know that there are issues when it comes to affordable housing within our city. There are issues when it comes to residential. Denise Moore was in Washington this week talking with a group of lawmakers and representatives there about this issue. Do you see an issue with the way that we have affordable housing within the city of Peoria, and what needs to be done to improve it? What can be done to improve it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And Eugene, I just wanted to also thank you for having the candidates on WMBD to talk about their platforms. In this race, there's going to be candidates that are spending over $100,000 to buy billboards and TV commercials and radio commercials. And so the role of media to provide a platform for everyone, including grassroots campaigns like mine, that won't be spending that much money because we're spending our time knocking on doors and calling people and talking to them. So I really appreciate the platform that you've provided for all candidates so that we don't only hear from those who have the most money, but we hear from everybody regardless of how much money they're raising. So thanks for that. And the question is a really good one. So you referenced a study by Governing Magazine that showed statistically with the data that we are one of the most segregated metropolitan areas in the country, and they looked specifically at our school districts. So, this isn't a surprise to me. These facts that we are one of the most segregated cities in the country has already been floating around there. Governing did a really good job of laying out the history of that, and I'll try to lay that out just briefly because I think it's important to know that context to be able to know what the role of government is to address that. So basically, since World War II, the federal government encouraged home ownership, and they subsidized mortgages for people in this country, but they had a specific formula that said that if you're a person of color moving into a white neighborhood, then you will reduce the property values in the neighborhood and you were denied a federally subsidized mortgage. At the same time, in our city, we were allowing people to write restrictive covenants into their deeds, which meant as new developments were being built, that those developments could not be later sold to people of color, people other than white people. The city's role, we were expanding north at this time over the last few decades. So we went from 1950, where we had about 12 square miles in the city, to today where we have 48 square miles. So we're quadrupling in our boundaries. The federal government is subsidizing primarily white people to build homes in the north, and we're enforcing the restrictive covenants that prevent those houses from being sold to people of color. There's many other institutions at play here. At this time, we got tough on crime, which basically meant we locked up, arrested, and punished disproportionately people of color in our community. So you have decades-long institutional racism that played into the situation that we have today, where we're one of the most segregated cities in the country. And I lay all that out not just to demonize government or to blame the people that came before us, but to lay out that it's our role as government and it's our role as elected leaders to own up to our past and think about how are we going to create a better future in this city for all races, and take into account the damage that we've done over the past few decades, especially to people of color. If people really believe that under your skin and under my skin we're the same people, regardless of whether you're black or white, then the differences in opportunity for people who look like you versus that people who look like me has to be the result of institutional racism. And I laid out some examples of that. What I think government can do, and this is what excites me as a candidate and why I decided to run, was that I think our best days can be ahead of us as a city. We can be the city that reversed the rankings from the 24/7 Wall Street to this governing study. We can be the model city in this country for becoming more integrated and for lifting up the people in our community that we've disinvested from the longest. Some of the ideas that I have for that are equitable development strategies. So as wealth is coming back into the city, specifically the warehouse district or downtown, we can make sure that if the city's using taxpayer funds to make those deals go through, that they don't only benefit the most wealthy, but they benefit those communities that just surround the urban core. So I'm thinking of the South Side, the East Bluff, the North Valley. What that looks like. So say that there's an incentive from the city to develop a building, an apartment. Maybe we enforce a community benefits agreement, which says the folks who live on the South Side, just a few blocks away from the warehouse district, are at the table with the developer and describing their needs for the community. If there's commercial being built on the first floor, maybe they hire from the community. If they're building residential on the upper floors, a portion of those are reserved for affordable housing, so people who live just a few blocks away can afford to live there. So I lay out the context to say it's government's role to deal with these issues. We can't just say it's the sum of individual choice and there's nothing we can do about it. It's a bummer that we got into this. No, we have an active role to play in reversing history and being proud of what Peoria will look like in 25 years.
You know, and you giving that explanation there towards the end, I'm curious of what your thoughts are on TIF districts. Do you believe that they're effective? Do you think that there should be another measure in which we are trying to raise funds for those collective areas?
Yeah, that's a good question. TIF districts are a mixed bag. Theoretically, they can be, and I guess I'll lay out because some people aren't really sure what they are. Essentially, the city freezes property taxes in a certain geographic area, and any increase in property taxes is not paid to the school district, the park district, the city. It's kept in a pot, and that pot is meant to spur economic development. And the idea is that it's supposed to spur economic development that wouldn't have happened other than for the TIF. So it's a little pot of money that the city has and uses to spur economic development. I think when it goes wrong is when we don't take a lens of equity into account. So I don't believe that growth for the sake of growth is going to reverse that long history that I laid out. But if we can use TIF funds to make sure that community benefit agreements are put into place or inclusionary zoning is used, which means that if a developer is building land and they're getting money from the city, then they have to reserve a portion for affordable housing, and if not, they pay a fee, and that affordable housing is built by another entity in the city. So they're a mixed bag. If they're not being put to use, I'm in favor of closing them down and returning those tax dollars that were scraped away back to the different district, whether it be the school district or the park district.
What will be your approach to the budget? Everyone knows within the city that the city just had to face that multi-million-dollar deficit.
Yeah.
They had to close that gap, ended up doing some cuts within police and fire, and then also including the new parcel fee for pension costs, and we know pension costs are a huge thing. What would be your approach? Let's say, the budget is balanced for the next few years, but, things can change. That you're in that position and you have to make a judgment. How would you approach the discussion on whether cut or raise, fees or taxes in order to fill the budget?
Yeah, this is really important. And we saw in this last budget discussion, I think a few things I would have advocated for being done differently. And it's hard to drop myself in on December 4th when they voted for the budget and say what I would have done or what I wouldn't have done. I would not have made deeper cuts in public safety. But I think what we missed and what I will work to do when I'm elected is creating a strategic plan that measures what outcomes we're achieving in the community. So public safety during the last budget discussion was described or defined as the number of firefighters or the number of police officers. Now, those are important, but they don't necessarily tell us how much safer we are as a community. I'll give you an example. Right after World War II, as I laid out the history of the city in about 1941, so during World War II, we built affordable housing development on the South Side called Warner Homes. By 1990, this was one of the highest crime areas in the city. Police were regularly being dispatched there. In 2002, the Peoria Housing Authority knocked down Warner Homes and in its place built a modern, quality, affordable housing development. If anyone's driven past it, it's beautiful. It's cottage-style homes. There's a front porch. There's a yard. It's a dignified place to live if you're living with a low income. What happened? Crime dramatically dropped in that same neighborhood, where it used to be basically military-style barrack housing to dignified, quality, affordable housing. That reduced crime. So I think we're a little misguided when we only consider how the police department and the fire department affect public safety. So what I'm going to be working to do is create a strategic plan for the city that guides the community based on the outcomes that we want to achieve and funds the programs that are most likely to achieve those outcomes, regardless of what department they're in or what they look like. Let's fund what actually works and what's a priority for the city.
All right, well, another issue with the city, obviously there's a lot of people who need jobs, right? And so we know that there's been a stigma that the city's really been fighting very strongly once Caterpillar left, that there were still jobs, that there's still economic opportunity in Peoria. I'm curious to hear your insight on that as someone who worked for the city before, obviously, you decided to run. Where you think the city is economically as far as opportunity, and what can be done to even push that further?
Yeah, so I'm in support of raising the minimum wage to a living wage because we know right now in 2019, if you're a single person with no kids, you need to be making about $13.74 to afford a basic household budget in Peoria. If you have a kid, that goes up to about $21 an hour that you need to be making just to afford the basics. No luxuries, but just to get by. So I think we are letting down the people in our community that are most in need, and I would advocate for raising that minimum wage. That is good for small businesses because it reduces turnover and it brings more people into the marketplace. We have a pretty low unemployment rate in the county, but we have one of the highest unemployment rates in the country for African Americans. I believe that raising the minimum wage not only will lift people out of poverty, it's been proven to do so by numerous studies, but it will also mean that you can make an honest living at a job that's paying minimum wage if it's raised to a living wage, rather than feeling like your best option is dealing dope on the corner.
I mean, and a lot of people have pushback, and I know we're running out of time, but a lot of people have pushback on that because of, you know, for businesses who feel like, hey, I'm already struggling, I'm already paying this fee and this fee, this tax, how they will be able to manage that. I mean, would the city be able to help in that regard?
Yeah, so I think it has to be done carefully with small businesses and with small businesses at the table. This is a trend that's happening nationally, and we're going to be leaving behind the poorest folks in our community if we don't catch up and have that conversation about what's appropriate. This happens over a number of years. It's not jumping to 15 next year. It's having a conversation in the next 5 years. What should our minimum wage be to ensure that people aren't living in poverty in one of the richest nations in the country? And we have a very wealthy city. We have a lot of wealth in this city. We need to make sure that we're not forgetting those people. All
right, last question I have for you is, I think is the most simple one for you. You got to cover 5 different areas, obviously, 1 through 5 within this position of being at large. What makes you the most qualified, in your opinion, to take on that seat?
Yeah, so I appreciate the opportunity to speak more generally too about my background. I am a first-generation American. My parents immigrated from an oppressive regime in communist Poland. My dad was a union leader who spent time in prison as a political prisoner, and that spirit lives through me. I've been a community organizer throughout my life, working on criminal justice reform. But most recently, I worked inside of City Hall, like you mentioned. I worked on the innovation team. So I had an opportunity to get to know people from the fire department to the police department, economic development, public works, legal, HR, finance. I understand the generalities of how local government works. I've spent more time in City Hall than some of the incumbents that are running for election. But I also have experience outside. And that's why my campaign is about knocking doors and talking to people. I've talked to over about 3,000 people so far in Peoria, and I'm looking to double that before the election. That's what I'm good at. I'm good at listening. If you've seen me in public, I'm authentic, I'm genuine, but I'm also a nerd when it comes to government policy and City Hall policy. I earned a master's degree in human rights and democracy, so I've not only studied it, I've not only worked in government, but I've also worked in the streets and gotten to know the needs that regular Peorians have.
All right. Well, again, thank you. Peter Kobak, running for City Council in Peoria for one of the at-large seats. I appreciate you for coming on, and best of luck to you.